Hi, my name is Suzanne Marriott, and I think cancer is a stupid jerk. It has devastated so many families, and I myself experienced cancer. I'm I beat it, fortunately, so I'm well now. But this happened in the midst of my caregiving for my husband who had MS. So it was quite a ride.
Uncorking a Story presents Cancer is a Stupid Jerk, a podcast where we share real stories from fighters, survivors, caregivers, and healthcare heroes who stand face to face with cancer and say, not today. We're all about embracing the laughs amongst the tears, finding elements of joy and lessons along the way, and proving time and again that love, laughter, and community are important tools on the treatment journey. So, whether you're in the thick of the fight, cheering someone on, or just here to be inspired by incredible tales of courage, resilience, recovery, and the undeniable power of the human spirit, you're in the right place because together we're showing cancer that it picked the wrong fight. Now, here's your host, Mike Carlon. Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of Cancer is a Stupid Jerk. Today on the show, we have Suzanne Marriott, who was diagnosed with colon cancer while she was playing the role of caretaker for her husband, who was living with MS. Now, talk about having a lot on your plate. In this interview, Suzanne not only reflects on her battle with cancer, but also the important lesson her fight taught her. I think you're going to be surprised by that. She addresses words of advice for those who are in the thick of the fight and shares some encouragement for caregivers, as she knows a thing or two about caring for someone who is fighting for their life. Now, this is a very powerful conversation, so let's jump right into it. So, talk to me a little bit about life before diagnosis. Just kind of paint a picture of your life for us before this stupid jerk came into your life.
Well, my husband and I had been together for, about, let's see, 20 years. And he was suddenly stricken with MS. I mean, if we're looking back, we could see that there were indications that something was wrong. But before that, we had such an active life. We would hike and backpack and mountain bike and travel and had a wonderful time. And as his MS appeared in our lives, um, we found ways to accommodate doing the things we love to do with modifications. Um, but about 6 years into his MS, which actually lasted for 10 years before he died, um, I was diagnosed with cancer, and he was in a wheelchair at that point. But he was terribly um, touched by what I was going through, and he was wonderfully supportive, even though he himself had so much to deal with. So in a way, we switched roles, and he became my caregiver as much as he could. And as I got better, I could care for him more. And so we had this reciprocal relationship.
Yeah, well, tell me a little bit about your fight, or tell us a little bit about your fight with cancer. What kind of cancer were you diagnosed with, and what was treatment like?
I had colon cancer, and I was teaching at the time and doing grant proposal writing for my district. And I had been thinking of retiring, and all of a sudden I retired because I I had to deal with this. And fortunately, I had enough years and seniority to do that. And the people I worked for were wonderful in giving me that opportunity to choose whether I wanted to continue for the rest of the year or retire. So I did all the allopathic things that one does, and I found a wonderful. Well, first of all, I had a wonderful primary care physician who ordered the correct test because my initial cancer surfaced as anemia. So I was given tests to find the source of that, and it wasn't too long after that that I had a colonoscopy and the cancer was discovered.
Yeah. So I mean, anemia is probably best case scenario there, and it sounds like the anemia was being caused by something a tad more invasive.
Yeah, loss of blood, and because of my age, I was menopausal, so they had to find something other than menstruation.
Yeah.
They found it.
Right. So how long was your treatment?
Well, it went on and on because I did prophylactic chemo, even though the surgeon said, as far as I'm concerned, you're well, you're fine. I got it all. And not only did he get it all, but he took some lymph nodes to be extra careful. And for some reason, he also took my gallbladder because it was a bit inflamed. So, but the next step through my HMO was to go to see an oncologist who told me, well, I had a 60% chance of being fine, but of course, a 40% chance of not. So I did do the chemo. And that lasted for 40, the first chemo she put me on lasted for 40 something days, and I wasn't able to tolerate it. I mean, it was just horrible. I was so weak, and I had to constantly go in for hydration. And I was, oh, I mean, I won't go into the details, but it was absolutely devastating. And of course, I couldn't do anything to care for my husband at the time. And finally, she said, well, this shouldn't have happened. We'll put you on something else. Well, that went on way too long, but the something else I did tolerate, but I had to start all over again. And so it went on for months.
Yeah, it's yeah, no, I'm
Usual, you know.
yeah, all that comes along with it. And at the time too, I mean your husband is he's battling MS, and it sounds like you were his primary caretaker. Now both of you are somewhat down for the count, although it sounds like he was able to step in a little bit and help you out.
He was. He had a van that operated with hand controls. And we had a wonderful woman who had hired previously, so she was already established. And she would come in every morning and get him up and bathed and toileted and dressed and all those things. So he was able to visit me in the hospital every other day. He didn't have energy to come every day, but it was just wonderful to have him there. And I remember when I did wake up from the surgery, when the anesthetic was wearing off, the first thing I saw was him sitting there in the wheelchair by my bedside.
Yeah.
So it was wonderful. Yeah.
And one thing I'm curious about is, I think there are various things in life that teach us lessons, and sometimes those lessons are they're hard lessons. But did cancer teach you anything? Just kind of you're going through it. Did you learn anything, or did you take anything positive away from cancer? I know it sounds like an odd question, but I'm just curious if you could look back on it and say, well, this is something that happened for me, and here's why.
Well, actually, there were gifts among the assaults. Um, and they were, not something I would want to change because it was a wonderful wake up for me as far as changing my perception of myself. My who I was at that time all wrapped up in being my husband's caregiver, and I was there for him, and that became my reason for being. But when I was struggling with cancer and in a life and death situation, it appeared, um, and as I came through it, more and more my self image was intrinsic, and I was living my life for myself as well as for Michael. But primarily, um, I was surviving because I had a right to live.
Yeah.
So it benefited me, and it also benefited him because I came out stronger.
I think there's a message there, and tell me what you think. I'm thinking of caregivers and the people who I've taken care of in my life, but also, and I'm thinking about my sister-in-law Carolyn at this moment because she spent 3 solid years of her life caring for my brother as he was going through his ups and downs, and of course the last stretch was particularly hard. There is this loss of identity for caregivers and caregivers, because everyone's kind of worried about the patient, right? And rightfully so, right? Somebody is very sick, they're facing something hard, but caregivers too play such an important role. And while people may ask the superficial, "Oh, how are you doing?" Um, it seems like people really want to understand. Okay, well, how is this other person doing who's sick? And then when the person you're caring for ultimately passes, like that, it's so much more devastating, I think, for the caregiver because their whole identity had been wrapped up in who they were caring for. um, it sounds like this was almost, I don't want to say a wake up call for you, but it was like a, hey, I matter, I'm important too, and I need to take a step back and take care of myself a little bit.
Yeah, my focus changed from caring for Michael, my husband, to caring for myself. Not that I didn't think of him and not that I abandoned him, I certainly didn't. But my focus changed and his focus changed. And
Yeah.
he was more focused on my well being and my surviving. And we didn't talk about what it would mean for him if I died, but I'm sure he must have thought of that. And would have been, I mean, that would have been devastating for him, as was his death eventually for me.
Yeah. I know in your book you write, the spirit of cancer appears to me as a messenger, perhaps Hermes. He whispers in my ear that I must get back on my transpersonal path and I must make that my first priority. To do so, I have to trust my intuition. That's a powerful line right there. Was that an inspired line?
Well, I depended a great deal on my own intuition and my spiritual practices, which were quite eclectic. And all this came to be as I was studying transpersonal psychology many years before that. Not many years, but several years before, which put me on a path of authenticity, spiritual seeking, um, and learning and seeking knowledge through experience and through intrinsic experience, my own intuition.
How important were your spiritual practices in your own fight with cancer, but as well as caregiving your late husband? What role did they play in your life?
Well, dreams, for one thing, were important as guidance for me and helped me internal or express and I said my internalize both feminine, caring, collaborative um, powers as well as masculine, assertive um, abilities. So that was very powerful. And I was seeing a therapist at the time who helped me to integrate these things. And I, um, both Michael and I had studied Tibetan Buddhism, and we found that very inspiring. And I had been raised in the Christian Science Church, although not strictly. But so the remnants perhaps of Christianity that I still embraced as far as being able to be healed through um, higher powers, as well as meditation, and also psychological uh, abilities or avenues such as active imagination in the Jungian form and dialogues with my wise old person, my higher knowledge and spirit. All these things came together, shamanic uh, journeys, um, just many, many things uh, were were wonderful tools and inspiring inspiration, I should say.
Yeah, it seems like you had a lot of different ways of I don't want to say attacking what was going on, but you've got your Western medicine that is, treating the chemo and the tumors and surgery, and then you've got your sort of Eastern practices, Eastern spiritual practices, kind of working, you know, hand in hand to get you through it. Any words of advice for people out there who maybe never consider themselves that spiritual, or maybe they were just like strictly religious in terms of how to tap into a spiritual side?
Well, I think it's different for everyone. So I certainly couldn't say that anything that worked for me would be the right thing for someone else. But for myself, I found direction through looking deeply inside and then reaching out to just what drew me and what felt meaningful and inspiring. So I'm an introvert. I work with intuition, and so that works for me. Other people may be more rational minded, and they want to seek knowledge, and it just depends on the person finding what works for them.
So I'm going to ask you two somewhat challenging questions. Well, you tell me if they're challenging or not. But I imagine there's somebody out there listening to this who maybe just today got the news that they have cancer. What words of advice, from a cancer survivor's perspective, do you have for that person who again maybe just found out or is sort of in the thick of the fight right now?
Well, one of the things I found very helpful was being in a support group. So I would encourage anyone to take a look at support groups because you find you're not alone. And you also find ways that you can help other people, which is very fulfilling to be able to be a source of aid to others. But also, you find other people have so much knowledge and about things that you might never know about without having been in a group. So everyone shares. So that would be one thing I would encourage people to do. But you have to work through your fear because that's normal, and just search in the way that you know how to, in whatever way works for you.
My brother would have deep long conversations with another family member through marriage, who was also things were actually looking worse for him than they were for my brother, and they would talk to each other all the time because no one else really understood like what they were feeling, what they were going through, and it was very helpful for those two to connect quite frequently to commiserate and understand and listen and kind of be a support system for each other. And the one thing, the other man's name was Mike. Mike told me, he's like, Mike, after this was after my brother had passed away. He's like, your brother and I used to talk all the time, and my brother wasn't. Yeah, I would never call him an extrovert either. He kept a lot of things to himself, so the thought of him like having these deep conversations with somebody else was I was interested in hearing that. And Mike would tell me, he's like, "Look, your brother knew what I was going through, and I knew what he was going through, and that kind of made all the difference." So this notion of like finding community and people to talk to, um, I know is spot on.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful, and it also takes some pressure off the caregiver because that person isn't your only source of support.
Right. Well, that leads to my other question for you, which is, what advice do you have for caregivers out there? Because obviously you fought and won your battle with cancer, but you're also taking care of somebody who was very sick and declining, and MS doesn't go into remission like cancer can sometimes do. So for the caregivers out there, what words of advice or support do you have for them?
Well, again, a support group was very helpful for me. Um, at that time, the MS Society where I was living did set up support groups. They were a place where people could come together. So that was helpful. Um, but working together in a collaborative manner with my husband based on love and trust was was one of the most important things. So to develop that collaboration and increase the level of trust and communication, um, I think is essential.
Well, I know you've written a book called "Watching for Dragonflies: A Caregiver's Transformative Journey," because that's how we initially met on Uncorking a Story. And I'd love for you to just give a brief elevator pitch to the audience and let them know where they can buy it if they're so inclined.
Well, my purpose in writing the book was to hopefully inspire other caregivers to know that they can come through this, to be what they need to be for the person they love and for themselves. And I hope that my example, which was very meaningful to me, can have meaning for other people, other caregivers. And my book is available, of course, on Amazon and other um, online sites. It's also available through bookstores, through Publishers Group West, and that's a part of Ingram. So any bookstore can find where to order it. So it's quite available. I have a website, SuzanneMarriottAuthor.com, which also has links to places to purchase the book.
Well, I will be sure to put all of those in our show notes, Suzanne. And I want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us on "Cancer is a Stupid Jerk." And I think I say that and I realize, yeah, it is a stupid jerk, but there are so many lessons in there, so many positives in there, in people's experiences that I'm so grateful that you shared those with us as well, because I think they do provide a little bit of hope for those listening.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for joining us today on "Cancer is a Stupid Jerk." We hope you found inspiration in today's episode and felt the strength of a community that refuses to let cancer have the last word. Remember, you're not alone in this fight, and every step forward is a victory. Join us every Sunday for more stories of resilience and recovery, and make sure to subscribe to our podcast on YouTube or your preferred podcasting platform. If you want to follow us on social media, you can find us at Stupid Jerk Cancer. If today's story moved you, consider sharing it with a friend or somebody who might need a dose of inspiration and encouragement. For all you bibliophiles out there, please check out our sister podcast, Uncorking a Story, which features interviews with best-selling authors. Until next time, keep laughing, keep loving, and keep fighting. This is Mike Carlon reminding you that together, we're unstoppable.